Working with Power BI Desktop is great, but it can be a bit overwhelming when getting started with the tool, especially as we have two tools integrated into Power BI Desktop, this data model here and the query editor, and therefore we should have a look at the general way Power BI Desktop and its features are organized. Whenever you start a new empty project, or here in my case, the finished project from the last module, you are in the actual data model. This means you have the report view opened by default. This view can be selected right here in this left column. And this view shows you the current visuals you have. Specifically, it shows you the first page of the report. You can only create one report in each individual Power BI Desktop project file, but you can add multiple pages to the report down here with these options, which we'll use a bit later throughout this course. Besides the report view, you also have this data view here. This is the view which presents the underlying data that you have in your data model, also with the corresponding fields. Please note that the fields column here to the right, this one, is also available in the report view. And the fields column contains all the different column names, so to say, which are named fields here. As we saw in the first example, we can drag and drop these different fields into a visual. So each field basically refers to the column with the underlying value a specific column contains. So if I select the GDP here, this column is selected, and with this also the so-called column tools here open. These tools allow me to interact with the values in that corresponding column, for example, to change the format or to add a decimal separator or to sort the values in the corresponding column. If I select the general query here once again in the fields, the column is unselected and we are back in the default table tools. These are tools which allow me to interact with the entire table. For example, I might want to add a new column here. This will also be done later in the course. I just want to give you a first glance of how this whole interface works here. Besides the report and the data view, we also have the model view here. That's the third option. In this model view, we can see all different tables that we have inside our project. At the moment, we only have one table, so we see this query 1, that's the name of the table, with the corresponding fields it holds. And here we could now create relationships between different tables we have. At this point of the course, this doesn't make too much sense, I guess, because we didn't dive into the general data model logic so far. Therefore, you can ignore this view for the moment. The more interesting ones are the data view and the report view here. As you saw, the available columns here to the right change depending on the selected view. In the report view, we have filters, visualizations, and fields, because we can drag the fields into the visual and then apply filters to the currently selected visual. Whereas in the data view here, we only have the fields column, because here we want to interact with the underlying data. Therefore, we only need to have field access. Same applies to the model view here. Here we only have the fields and specific properties for the individual tables. As I said, this is not too helpful at this stage, therefore we'll ignore this. You probably also noted that up here we have different ribbons available with different features. And the ribbons also change depending on the selected view here to the left. So if I switch back to the data view, you see we have these table tools selected by default, but we could also go back to the home view, which is the same basically for all three views. So home view here, in the report view, in the data view, and in the model view is more or less the same, only specific view-dependent features are added or removed. You also see that different ribbons appear or disappear depending on the selected view. Here we have the table tools, for example, whereas in the report view, we have other views like insert here or this view ribbon. So this all depends on the view you're currently in. As I said, we'll dive into many of these features throughout the course. I just want to make sure that you get used to these different views here to the left. and how these have an impact onto the available options that we have. So this is the data model part actually, but we can of course also access the query editor from that data model. To do this, we go to the Home ribbon in the report view and then go to Transform Data and select it in the upper part of this button here. This now opens the query editor in the current project and brings us back to this interface that we saw in the first module already. In here you can see multiple things. In the left column here, you see the current connection to the query that you have. And once adding more source files here, you will find a list of all the source files we are connected to. In the center of the screen, you see the actual preview of the loaded data for the corresponding query. And in the right here, you have the query settings. These query settings contain the query name here, which you can change, and the applied steps. We had a look at these steps already in the last module, and these steps are very important because these allow you two things. First, you see which steps you applied to the project. And second, these steps allow you to undo specific steps and also to jump back in your applied steps list here and remove or check earlier steps. As you see, I now jump back to the removed columns step here, which undid the row filtering and the type change. However, as I just clicked onto the step and I didn't remove it here, I can simply go back to my latest step and all my changes are back. In case you cannot see this query settings column, by the way, you can go to the View ribbon up here and then select the query settings. If you click it, it disappears. If you click it again, it appears. The same thing applies to this formula bar up here, which we'll ignore for the moment. In case you cannot see this formula bar, you have to tick the box next to this formula bar option here. Here it disappears, now it appears. As I already navigated into the View ribbon up here, just as we saw it in the data model, we also have different functions available categorized into different ribbons. Here we have the View ribbon. As you saw, this has an impact onto the way we display our information here to the right, for example, with the query settings or with the formula bar. You can also add columns, so interact with the existing query here in this Add Column menu. But you also have options to transform the current structure of your actual table that you have. I'll not dive into these transformations right now. Again, we'll do this throughout the course, but it's just important to understand that you have different ways to interact with your information to perform this cleansing and transformation steps we talked about already in this module. In the Home ribbon, we find some special home features related to the actual connection to the data source. And we also find some, quite common features which are taken from the Transform ribbon here, for example. So certain features you see right here in the Home ribbon can also be found in the dedicated ribbons up here. If you're done with your work in the query editor, you can simply leave it with the Close and Apply logic here in the left part in the Home ribbon. By clicking here, we close the query editor and we are back in the data model. And that's actually the Power BI desktop interface in a nutshell. Of course, we are far from understanding or exploring all the features Power BI Desktop offers. I just wanted to make sure that you get a first idea of how Power BI Desktop and its different features are organized. With this, we are actually almost ready to dive into the course and into the course project. There is only one last thing I would like to show you, and these are the recommended settings, and I would like to create a specific Power BI Desktop project blueprint, which we can use to follow along this course.